It's been more than 2 years since Russia brutally invaded Ukraine. That's 2 years more than Russia's President Vladimir Putin thought the invasion would last. Putin believed Kyiv would fall in a matter of days, clearing his path to complete control. And yet, Ukraine still stands. Having inspired global solidarity and joint resistance against aggression, the country has not only defended its sovereignty for 2 long years, but also managed to deal numerous decisive blows to Russia. So much so that the country once hailed as the second strongest military force in the world is now considered by many the second strongest military force in Ukraine. But is this true? So what is the true state of the Russian armed forces in 2024? That's what you'll find out in this video. If you were to inquire about the true state of the Russian armed forces in 2022 or even 23, you would have received a much different answer. As mentioned, Putin was nowhere near prepared for the resistance and resilience shown by Ukraine. This allowed the invaded country to thwart initial Russian advances and inflict significant losses on Russian forces. These losses were so great that in 2023, US intelligence officials claimed that it would take at least a decade for Moscow to recover. German experts gave Moscow a little more credence, estimating that Russia's military would need 5 to 8 years to fully recuperate. But in a shocking turn of events, Moscow seemingly needed months, not years, to regain significant strength. Western military leaders, experts, and observers can only look on as Russia displays an extraordinary ability to endure severe punishment and recover at a rate no one could have anticipated. These superhuman reconstruction efforts are fueled by one thing, besides Putin's spite, a massive military budget. To begin to understand just how massive, all you need to know is that Russia's defense budget for 2024 accounts for as much as 1/3 of all government spending. So how much money is Putin pouring into his war machine? A staggering 7% of its GDP, a record high since the Cold War era. To put this figure into perspective, the US, the top military spender worldwide, is allocating 3.4% of its GDP for defense purposes. China, another major spender, is using only 1.7% of its GDP for its military. Interestingly, the only country spending more in terms of GDP percentage in the top 10 is Ukraine, with a remarkable 37%. Of course, we're missing the GDPs of these countries to get the full picture, so let's talk numbers. The mentioned 7% of Russia's GDP amounts to $140 billion. That's how much Russia is investing in reconstructing its military, and that's just the beginning. The budget signed in 2023 actually spans the next 3 years, during which military spending is expected to surpass the $400 billion mark. From these figures alone, it's evident that Russia has no intention of ending its invasion of Ukraine anytime soon. Quite the contrary. The country's obviously intending to overwhelm Ukraine in the coming years. However, it's also becoming increasingly apparent that Putin is ushering Russia into a state of perpetual war. With the amount of money he's pouring into the military, he has enough funds to impose martial law or call for a full mobilization virtually whenever. Speaking of large-scale mobilization, this is precisely what helped Russia recuperate its military strength after initial setbacks. Though calling Russia's losses setbacks might be an understatement, as the country is estimated to have expended almost 90% of its pre-war troops as of December 2023, and yet the numbers we're seeing now suggest that Russia's military is bigger than ever. How is this possible? The answer is simple. Russia is focusing on quantity, not quality. In late 2022, Russia enlisted 300,000 new troops to fight in Ukraine. By June 2024, it plans to mobilize another 300,000 people for the same purpose. So numbers-wise, it appears Russia's military is flourishing. However, this emphasis on quantity comes at a cost, and a major one at that. You see, the new recruits are hastily trained at best and lack the experience and expertise of seasoned soldiers. So yes, Russia is replenishing its ranks at an impressive speed, constantly sending new troops to the front lines, but as things stand, these troops are sent there to die. However, Putin doesn't seem to care, just like he doesn't care where these new troops are coming from. That's why there have been reports of Russia mass recruiting foreign nationals into volunteer formations under a short-term contract. Russia has also reportedly mobilized prisoners for assault squads using 6-month contracts. Then there are mercenaries from the Akhmat Group of the Chechen Special Forces and the Wagner Group, the notorious Russian state-funded private military company. Just the creme de la creme, don't you agree? But again, Russia isn't particularly picky. The Kremlin doesn't care about the methods as long as it achieves its desired outcomes. That's why many of the currently contracted Russian soldiers were actually forced into signing a new contract. Of course, this isn't the case for all the contracted soldiers in the Russian army. Some are there consciously, motivated by patriotism and a sense of duty. However, a large chunk of the soldiers who've joined the Russian army willingly are there to improve their poor financial situation. There are even some soldiers who joined army branches that aren't involved in the war, thus essentially hiding in plain sight. All in all, there were around 470,000 troops in Ukraine at the beginning of 2024. That's roughly 13% of the total Russian military, which is estimated to have 3.57 million personnel. Of course, this number accounts for both the active and reserve personnel, which comprise 1.32 million and 2 million personnel, respectively. The rest of the Russian military consists of paramilitary formations. Despite the heavy losses, Russia only plans to expand its military. By the end of 2026, the number of active duty armed forces is expected to grow to 1.5 million people. Out of these troops, half will be staffed by contract servicemen. However, Russia expects to reach this number of 750,000 contract servicemen by the end of 2024. Now, if you think these figures sound too good to be true, you're absolutely right. The ever-accelerating recruitment pace would be challenging to pull off even for a nation with a stable and thriving economy, let alone one grappling with sanctions and internal strife. The truth is that this mass recruitment is nothing but a bureaucratic campaign that aims to achieve the desired army size on paper, with no regard for how sustainable or effective it will be in practice. That's why the 300,000 new servicemen Russia plans to mobilize in 2024 will probably suffer the same fate as the initial 300,000 thrown to the front lines in 2022. As mentioned, Russia lost almost 90% of its pre-war troops by December 2023. These losses account for up to 120,000 troops killed and roughly 200,000 soldiers wounded. But how is it possible for a country as militarily powerful as Russia to lose so many soldiers when battling a smaller and less equipped nation like Ukraine? The answer primarily lies in Russia's highly attritional military tactics. The country's troops are often pushed to the point of inoperability before being rotated out. Russia also often relies on human wave attacks, which lead to massive casualties as soldiers are sent into battle with little regard for their survival. These types of attacks were used around places like Bakhmut and Avdiivka, costing thousands of poorly armed and trained Russian soldiers their lives as they rushed entrenched Ukrainian positions. To understand just how great these losses are, all you need to know is that Russia lost more soldiers in the 4-month campaign for Avdiivka than it did in a decade-long war in Afghanistan. But Russia's army isn't only degrading in terms of human losses. The attritional tactics have also taken a severe toll on its equipment and resources. With this in mind, let's see how Russia's armed forces stand in terms of military equipment in 2024. First up, Russia's land power. The ground is generally where Russia is perceived to be at its most powerful. Look at any category that matters in this regard, the number of tanks, artillery, or armored vehicles, and you'll see that Russia is either number 1 or in the top 3 countries in the world. However, having many ground military assets also means there are many assets to lose. This especially rings true for Russia, which has been recklessly deploying its land force in Ukraine. In tanks alone, Russia has lost over 3,000 units since 2022. This is roughly the number of active tanks the Russian military was operating pre-war. Some reports even indicate that the number of lost tanks is twice as high, over 7,000 units. But despite the heavy losses, Russia still securely holds the number 1 position in total number of tanks worldwide. The country owes this position to a massive stockpile of Soviet-era tanks, many of which have returned to service after years of inactivity. So as of 2024, models like the T-55 and T-62 tanks can be found in active service despite being decommissioned years ago. But like with the number of added troops, we have another quality versus quantity dilemma. Russia may boast a large number of tanks, but many of them were in need of replacement even before the war in Ukraine began. So just imagine how well these units fare in a modern combat scenario. Though you don't have to imagine, as the reports coming from Ukraine paint quite a vivid picture. For instance, Russia lost 31 tanks in a single day, May 13, 2024. Just a day before, it lost another 5 units. On April 7th, the number of Russian tanks was reduced by 17. March 28th wiped out another 10 tanks from Russia's inventory. While trying to seize control of Avdiivka in February 2024, Russia lost a staggering 400 tanks. January 28th took 10 more tanks from the Russian army, and the list goes on and on. The country started the year with about 160,000 infantry fighting vehicles, making it the 3rd largest fleet in the world. But each of the attacks described above also wiped out a portion of Russia's fighting vehicle inventory. Since the beginning of the invasion, Russia has lost around 8,800 of these vehicles, primarily consisting of MTLBs, BMPs, and BTRs. Despite their Cold War roots, these vehicles have served Russia's military well for decades, providing mobility and firepower to its troops. The same can't be said for the D-10 and D-20 howitzers, which have previously been decommissioned. However, just like the mentioned Soviet-era tanks, these artillery pieces returned to service to make up for the heavy losses suffered in this department. At the beginning of 2024, Russia was estimated to have over 6,200 self-propelled artillery pieces and over 8,300 towed pieces. Though it's lost quite a few throughout 2024, it seems that the situation with artillery shells is more urgent than the one with artillery pieces themselves. That's why Russia significantly ramped up its production volumes, dipped into its stockpiles, and even turned to North Korea and Iran for imports. Over 300,000 artillery shells were shipped over the Caspian Sea from Iran to Russia in as little as 6 months. North Korea has sent 10 times as much since September 2023, providing a major lifeline for Russia's land forces. The reliance on countries like Iran and North Korea, which undoubtedly have their own geopolitical agendas, underscores the lengths to which Russia is willing to go to persevere in the war against Ukraine. Russia has relied on these countries in other regards as well. For instance, Moscow has extensively employed Iranian drones instead of cruise missiles, as the latter are significantly more expensive and decreasing in number at an alarming rate. Now let's discuss Russia's air power in 2024. Given how important drones are becoming on the modern battlefield, let's discuss them first. Interestingly, Russia was slow to realize the importance of over-battlefield drone aircraft, which is why it initially lagged behind other countries in developing and deploying drone technology. However, Russia came to its senses, and as of 2024, it's estimated to have over 3,500 drones. But most of its locally made drones are used for reconnaissance missions, while the attack aircraft have been primarily imported from Iran. In the drone department, Russia has fared pretty well, having reported almost no losses in 2024. The same can't be said for the country's other aircraft. In 2024 alone, Russia lost 8 jets and 1 helicopter. Here's a quick overview of the lost aircraft. Number 1. The Beriev A-50, a Soviet-era airborne early warning and control (AEW&C) aircraft. Since this aircraft was lost over the Sea of Azov, the Russian Air Force now has 12 more units in its arsenal. Number 2. The Ilyushin Il-22, a Soviet-era airliner. This aircraft was damaged by a surface-to-air missile, leaving the Russian Air Force with only 1 functional unit. 3. The Ilyushin Il-76, a Soviet-era multi-purpose turbofan strategic airlifter. This shot-down aircraft was one of 120 in Russia's fleet. Number 4. The Sukhoi Su-35, an air defense fighter. After this multi-role fighter was shot down over eastern Ukraine, Russia is in possession of 117 of these jets. 5. Another Su-35, shot down over the Azov Sea, bringing the total to 116. Number 6. Another A-50, lowering the total number to 11. Number 7. The Sukhoi Su-27, a Soviet-origin twin-engine supersonic fighter aircraft designed for air superiority missions. Russia still has over 50 of these advanced jets in its inventory. Number 8. The Tupolev Tu-22M, a supersonic maritime strike bomber. An engine fire caused this aircraft to crash near Stavropol, leaving the Russian Air Force with 66 total units. Though these losses are significant, the sheer number of remaining aircraft in each category should tell you that Russia still has a rather sizable air force. In total, this air force consists of the following: over 800 fighter jets, over 700 attack aircraft, over 400 transport aircraft, over 100 special mission aircraft, almost 20 tanker aircraft, and over 1,500 helicopters, of which more than a third are attack helicopters. Of course, Russia isn't able to actively employ all of these aircraft at once for several reasons. The availability of pilots with sufficient experience is among the primary ones. Still, Russia has been able to maintain air superiority over Ukraine for the entire 2 years since the invasion. The only event that could potentially change this is the highly anticipated arrival of the Western-made F-16 jets, which Ukraine should receive in June or July 2024. With these jets, Ukraine will be able to challenge Russia in the air more forcefully and potentially down more aircraft as the year goes on. Though to be fair, Ukraine has done a pretty good job at keeping the Russian Air Force at bay, especially considering the inferior nature of its own air power. However, there's another theater where Ukraine has worked wonders with almost no power: the naval theater. Despite having virtually no navy, Ukraine has managed to wreak havoc on its oppressor's naval capabilities, sinking dozens of its vessels. Ukraine has made such advances that it's virtually freed the Black Sea of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, making many experts wonder whether Crimea can be back under Ukraine's control soon. So far in 2024, Ukraine has managed to damage 3 Russian vessels. Number 1, a Tarantul-class corvette, R334 Ivanovets, one of 20 in the Russian Navy's possession. However, this loss doesn't change the fact that Russia has the highest number of corvettes in the world, with over 80 in total. Number 2, a Rapucha 1-class landing ship, Cesar Kunikov, one of 15 in Russia's arsenal. Number 3, a Mangust-class patrol boat, one of 62 Russia owns. If Ukraine gets its hands on the F-16 jets, these numbers could also exponentially rise. But for now, Russia still has a pretty solid navy, with almost 800 total vessels. Some of the highlights include 65 submarines, 47 mine warfare vessels, 14 destroyers, and 12 frigates. However, it's important to note that not all of these vessels can reach Ukraine. With Turkey's blockade of the Black Sea and Ukraine's decisive actions in the region, the local Russian navy seems less than impressive. Worst of all, Russia can't simply produce new vessels for the Black Sea Fleet, as this would take substantial time and resources, both of which Russia currently lacks. But what about Russia's production efforts in other departments? Well, they're well underway. Like Russia's population, the defense industry has been fully mobilized, as arms manufacturers are urged to work round the clock. And just like with the troops, impossibly high numbers are being thrown around production-wise. Once again, Russia is doing all in its power to project an image of overwhelming strength and resilience. But in reality, this staggering production growth can be explained by 2 not-so-desirable practices. Number 1. Production efforts heavily rely on stocks of materials and components Russia has previously accumulated. But naturally, these stocks are finite, so it's only a matter of time before they deplete. And number 2. Russia is resorting to cannibalization. Cannibalization is the practice of refurbishing or repairing equipment using parts salvaged from other units, often resulting in compromised performance and reliability. Since neither of these practices is sustainable, Russia is struggling to maintain an impressive rate of production in 2024, lowering the industry's capacity to support the ongoing military operations. For now, the annual output of the Russian defense industry is expected to reach 1,500 tanks, 3,000 armored vehicles, up to 5 million artillery shells, up to 1,500 long-range missiles, up to 4,200 one-way attack drones. As mentioned, Russia is also relying on allies for the weapons it can't manage to produce, or components for the equipment it's currently producing. Besides North Korea and Iran, China has been a major ally in this regard, supplying components for helicopters, jamming technology for military vehicles, components for defense systems, and parts for fighter jets. All things considered, it becomes clear that the Russian armed forces can fight for quite some time. But what about the commanders of those forces? Russia can put up a front of unwavering leadership all it wants, but the number of replaced commanders since the beginning of the invasion suggests that the country's military hierarchy is severely fractured, and Putin is less than satisfied with the military's performance. In 2024 alone, there were 2 major dismissals, indicating the true state of the Russian armed forces. Number 1, Admiral Nikolai Yevmenov, the commander-in-chief of the Russian Navy. The 61-year-old admiral got the boot after allowing Ukraine to sink a string of warships in the Black Sea. He was replaced by Admiral Alexander Musayev in March 2024. Number 2, and arguably the biggest Kremlin shakeup since the invasion began, Sergei Shoigu, Russian Minister of Defense of 12 years. Shoigu was Putin's close ally and the longest-serving member of his cabinet. Still, he was dismissed and replaced by a civilian, no less. His replacement is a technocrat economist, Andrei Belousov, who's likely been chosen to bring a fresh perspective to the military leadership after the defense budget has been ratcheted up to 7% of Russia's GDP. Plus, it helps that he's unconnected to corruption allegations that are currently being investigated by Russian authorities. So, where do all of these contradictory data and actions leave us? In the famous quote from HBO's limited series Chernobyl, "Not great, not terrible." On the one hand, the Russian armed forces are doing much better than any Western observer could have predicted, in 2024 at least. For now, the country seems to be holding its own against Ukraine and its Western allies, maintaining its position as a major military power. On the other hand, the progressive military depletion and prioritizing quantity over quality is bound to catch up with Russia at some point. Though the Kremlin believes it can sustain the current attrition rate through 2025, it's likely that by 2026, Russia will have exhausted most of its available stocks and resources, leading to significant challenges in maintaining its combat power and effectiveness in the long run. But again, we're talking about Russia, and with Russia, you never know. Some high-ranking officials believe that Russia will continue strengthening its armed forces at the same rate, with the end goal of challenging a NATO member state. But what do you think? Can Russia truly maintain its aggressive stance in the long run? Or do you believe it's only a matter of time before the country's armed forces crumble? And let us know how you perceive the state of the Russian armed forces in 2024, a remarkable show of resilience or a crumbling facade. Share your thoughts and opinions in the comments section below. Now go and check out why Russian air defense is a joke, or click this other video instead.